I'm Director Steve Lupien of the University of Wyoming Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation. I'm especially pleased today to introduce two people that are with me today because today was our 7th annual Wyoming Blockchain Stampede at the University of Wyoming. And that gave us the opportunity to bring very special guests to campus to talk about all things blockchain, digital asset, and digital asset adjacent. So the first person I want to introduce is the chairman of the event, who is Caitlin Long, who is a UW alum and very notable in the Bitcoin space. And our special guest today is Alex Pruden of Aleo. And today, what we're going to talk about is a blockchain adjacent technology, which I believe is going to revolutionize how the digital asset world operates, especially in the areas of privacy and I don't want to step on anything that Alex has to say, but Alex has been a terrific supporter of the University of Wyoming and our event. And so I'm really pleased to have him talk with you all about zero-knowledge proofs and why it's going to be so important in your future.
Well, thank you. It's a big pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to sponsor this event. It's amazing. I gave a talk today about this topic, and so thankfully I'm very fresh on everything, and hopefully, every listener will benefit from that. But so zero-knowledge cryptography, I completely agree with your sentiment, is going to be a game changer. And I would actually go further than what you said, is not just for Web3. I think it goes even beyond Web3 to do, the broader internet. But I think really as it relates to blockchains and Web3, I think it's really, I kind of think about 3 ways in which zero knowledge can really help, or how it can apply. First off, you already mentioned privacy, right? The zero knowledge, the term itself implies, some level of concealment, or like you have zero knowledge of what I'm, sending or something like that. And, I think privacy is an important missing piece for blockchain transactions today. And I think oftentimes people, sometimes wrongly assume that because, in the early days of Bitcoin, it was used for some kind of like illicit activities. Like you're like, oh, well, it's like the perfect money for crime. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously not true, right? In fact, it's actually the opposite. And it's a much more transparent system than many people would at first consider. And really the equivalent is like, you just post all your transactions up on a giant bulletin board in the sky. Mm-hmm. And I think, there's potential advantages to a system like that, particularly around, you think of like, transparency for charities and stuff. But I think when you think about real world business use cases where, we're not, as people generally, used to sharing our salaries or the contents of our bank account, or businesses, aren't really used to this concept of like showing the contracts they negotiate with suppliers, right? So in real world business context, privacy actually does matter for transactions. The second area I think zero knowledge cryptography applies is in the second word, which is cryptography. So, the output, what zero knowledge cryptography is interaction between two parties, a prover and a verifier, and the prover has to generate a cryptographic proof, and that proof guarantees the validity of a statement, cryptographically speaking, which means that it's basically impossible to forge, right? And I think that applies in a lot of areas where, if you think about, how compliance is done today, for example, where it's a lot of time, it's after the fact checking that, does this person match this profile of someone who's likely to be, in violation of the law, right? Whereas I think with a zero knowledge cryptographic focused technique, you would just maybe upfront say, hey, in order for you to transact on the system, you need to prove cryptographically that you meet all these criteria, right? And so there's like kind of no exceptions allowed, really. Mm-hmm. And so I think cryptographic validity is one. And then lastly, scalability, right? So there's an interesting property of these zero knowledge proofs, which is that they're quote unquote succinct, which really just means that the proof of a long statement is small, right? And so how does that apply to the blockchain context? Well, you can batch a bunch of transactions together in one transaction. So you can batch these things, and therefore you can create more scalability within a system, right? So often people complain about blockchains. They're like, oh, it's not going to be the future of commerce because it just does, it's so slow. But I think with zero knowledge cryptography, you can kind of break that because it enables some of the scalability because these proofs are succinct. So those are 3 ways in which I think it really applies to blockchain technology and why I think it's really going to revolutionize the space.
Well, thank you. Talk to me about Aleo, and really give us, where did Aleo come from, and really talk to us about, how your company in particular is really going to impact this space.
Yeah. So Aleo, I think let's see. The best way I would describe Aleo is, if you think about the original cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, right? And so Bitcoin was the first, and then people, started to think about how could Bitcoin be improved. Some folks focused on privacy, right? And using zero knowledge proofs even to improve Bitcoin. And that was Zcash, right? And so that was basically Bitcoin with zero knowledge proofs. And then folks who ended up founding Ethereum said, hey, well, what if we took this paradigm and made it kind of more like a computer, more programmable, kind of introduce a VM and so smart contracts. And that was kind of Ethereum. What Aleo is really trying to do is combine those two ideas, right? Is taking the privacy and the power of the zero knowledge proofs that I just described in Zcash and applying that to a smart contract context in Ethereum. So that's Aleo. It's based on a paper called ZK, which was published in 2018 by several Zcash co-founders, actually. And it's been, 6 years now since, that paper was published. I've been with Aleo for 4 years, and the company was started 5 years ago, and we just launched mainnet today.
Literally today. First of all, thank you for being here, and probably one of your biggest fans. If your phone's not blowing up, that's a good sign.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, but it's been a long, hard road, and obviously, it's simple to state these things. It was like, zero knowledge smart contracts, but the devil is very, very much in the detail, especially when you're trying to kind of preserve the properties that we were really aiming for. And those are, in order, permissionlessness. I mean, I think personally, I think blockchains are permissionless. That's the defining characteristic. So it's very important that the network be permissionless. I can't control it. You can't control it. No one can control it. It's just community owned, network owned, however you want to put it. Programmable, right? In that sense, it's like, hey, I've got these zero knowledge proofs. I'm not a cryptographer. So how do I get the program to do the zero knowledge stuff without knowing all that, right? And so we had to build basically an entirely new compiler and language around this zero knowledge paradigm. And so that's the programmability aspect. And then lastly is the privacy aspect, of course. And so the kind of unique thing about this programming paradigm is you can basically define as a smart contract programmer. You say, okay, here's a program, here's a bunch of functions. The input to this function is going to be private, provided by the user. And maybe here's some other functions that are going to be public that, is okay to be in the global state of the blockchain, right? And so you can kind of mix and match these things to create interesting new types of smart contracts or decentralized applications that weren't possible before. For example, right, you could imagine a stable coin where it's like, okay, here's the public state about a stable coin that's, issued on the Aleo blockchain. And to send the stable coin, if the amount is above $10,000, maybe you have to do some kind of KYC where you're proving in zero knowledge that, I'm not the citizen of a sanctioned country and that I'm not sending it to a recipient who is a citizen of a sanctioned country. So you can do some kind of proof like that. So that part of the input though can be private, right? And the user is basically, it's up to them to provide the information that ultimately creates that proof or doesn't, right? If they don't have the correct information. So those are the three things: permissionlessness, programmability, and privacy. That's what Aleo enables.
Who watching this podcast is what questions should they ask themselves where the answer is, I need to reach out to your company?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think really any type of real world financial application or identity application that, people want to, and, use a blockchain based architecture for, and really, let me say that in a little more clear terms, where you want user ownership of the data, but you don't want the user to just publish that data. And this kind of gets back to what I said, where I think there's a lot of context where I think this applies even beyond Web3. I mean, think about credit score agencies or credit rating agencies. They have a bunch of very valuable to an individual data, right, that they aggregate, and, there's someone's job to secure all that. But inevitably, the benefit of hacking into that database far outweighs the cost to secure it.
Right.
And so it's just a matter of time until they're going to get hacked. If you talk to many of these fintech companies or finance companies, they're like, we'd actually prefer to not have any of this data.
Absolutely. Data is nuclear waste, personally identifiable information. Absolutely. But the law requires financial institutions to hold it for 5 years.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. But all things being equal, so obviously there's legal considerations, but all things being equal, I think there's many reasons to prefer, in some contexts, not every context, but in some contexts, to prefer a paradigm where it's like, you've got a bunch of data relating to you or your financial history, your identity, or your medical data, or whatever it is. And you want to be able to leverage that without revealing it. And then someone on the other end wants to be able to trust that data is valid, or whatever, right? And so I think that's really what Aleo is all about enabling, right? And I think because it's the ownership piece comes from a blockchain, right? Because it allows ownership of of data, right? And then the zero knowledge piece is what enables the privacy to work, as well as the cryptographic guarantee if it's full.
How can someone reach out to you? What's the best way to get to you?
Probably Twitter right now, or X as we call it these days. I'm at Pruden08. You can also check out aleo.org. That's where it's kind of our main landing page. We've got a whole bunch of documentation about Aleo there. We also, if you're a developer, we have leo-lang.org, and that's a developer playground where people can try out our smart contract language called Leo. And yeah, I think those are probably the three best places to get started and learn a little bit more about what we're building.
Well, I can't thank you enough for supporting the university and our events. And when we created our center 6 years ago now, which is kind of an eternity in this space, you were really the exact types of companies that we were looking to work with. You're wonderful with our students, and to come out here and support us at this event, I can't thank you enough. And so I want to encourage anybody out there, please look up Aleo, support our partners, and feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to Alex.
DM me with questions.
Yeah, and
DMs are open.
And thank you so much for being such a wonderful partner.
Thank you. It's great to be here.